And I am recording because I know a few people. Ellen Gusson is trying to make, and Izzy's got the, we wish both of them feel better. So, Deir Yassin. So, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the author. Her name is Margot Singer. She looks very nice. I think the way it was written was, interesting. But I think, let me tell you a little bit about her, and then I want to talk a little bit about Deir Yassin. Margot Singer is an American short story writer and novelist. Her book, The Pale Sentiment, won the Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction in 2006. And her novel, Underground Fugue, was listed as one of the most anticipated books by women in 2017. She graduated from Harvard. She went to Oxford. She's very erudite, and I don't have when she was born, but, she looks, I don't know, younger than me. We'll leave it at that. Okay. Now, Deir Yassin. When you say Deir Yassin to anyone familiar with Jewish history, Israeli history, it is a very difficult topic. It's not one we always teach in school. Maybe we should. And I just want to read, and it's hard to find a description that's not slanted one way or another. This is from Wikipedia. But the Deir Yassin massacre, it was a massacre, took place on April 9th, 1948. So it's in the midst of the Independence War, when around 130 fighters from Zionist paramilitary groups, Irgun and Lehi, and those two groups are like the right wing of what would now be the IDF, because the Haganah was the more the general one and not quite as right wing. And the explosion at the King David Hotel, that was Irgun. So these guys were to the right. And they killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women and children, in Deir Yassin, a village of roughly 600 people near Jerusalem, despite having earlier agreed to a peace pact. The massacre occurred while Jewish militias sought to relieve the blockade of Jerusalem. They did blockade Jerusalem. It was absolutely terrible to live there during 1948. There was no water, no food, no nothing. And that preceded the end of the British rule in Palestine. And you can read more and more about that, but you have to know, when you say Deir Yassin, it's like, I think, when we say My Lai massacre to Americans, know what that invokes in us. I think the same thing invokes in Israelis. And I mean, I have done that much reading on the My Lai massacre since college, and that was in the 80s. So, but it's that same feeling of, what did my country do? This was wrong. These are innocent people. These are children. These are women. So,
Vanessa,
yes.
Can I just ask?
Sure.
I know what Deir Yassin is, right. I've known it for years, but was Begin a part of that attack or not? Do you know Begin?
I don't know. Begin was definitely part of the Irgun. Whether he knew about it, I have no idea. And I'm sure because he became prime minister of Israel, they've covered it up. I mean, if he was, we'll never know. And, I don't know anyone who would know that, or if that's true or not. But it was definitely the more right-wing part of the army. And of course, remember, Israel was just founded. They had this fledgling state, this fledgling army. And, it's hard to know who said, go do that. The one thing I will say, and I'm we're reading this today, they're fighting a war in Israel today. usually those soldiers are young, impetuous boys. There are some women and they do fight in the combat and they're probably not as impetuous as the boys, but would you trust your 18 or 19 or 20 or 22-year-old progeny to make a decision for the whole country? No. Their frontal lobe isn't developed. And, I have really Rahmanas, I have mercy on the decisions that these kids have to make. And they're kids. And whether they're, standing guard or they're fighting. And it's just so difficult. And I work a lot with a group of Israelis called Shin Shanim. They're on a Shanat Sherut. Their year of service is before they go into the army. And they're here working in schools and Hebrew schools and our camps. And I was talking to my girlfriend and she said they're moving up their induction date. So they're going to have to go into the army sooner because and when you see these young kids dying and they show their pictures, it's very, very difficult. And we're still in the midst of it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next month, 6 weeks, 2 months. And decisions have to be made of trips to Israel, Israelis coming here, us going to Israel. It's all on hold. Ben Gurion Airport is empty. Tourism is a big part of their economy. I don't know how they're surviving. I don't know how they're surviving. So, yeah, that what Alice said. It's just really, So, we have this, we have she's going, the whole premise of the story is interesting, and that they're taking, the ashes, which is not, to be cremated is not a traditional Jewish thing. So that already shows you that what's going on here. And, the people in the family don't really talk to one another. They haven't seen one another. So, did you like the way it was laid out and written?
That's really
different.
It was a little and interesting.
Yeah. Confusing. Why was it confusing?
I understand that they different points of view, but it seemed to go back and forth, and I wasn't exactly sure if the story, the main character of the story was.
Yeah.
Well, and she goes from poetry to prose.
Yes.
So
She goes from poetry to prose. Yeah.
You don't usually read a story.
Yeah. Right.
I have to say, I thought it was very interesting and definitely resonated with me at very things that, I could relate to, that I've experienced or known about. But I was confused enough by what she was trying to accomplish that I did this amount of research, more than I normally do, these stories. There is so much written, not only about her, but about this particular story.
Yeah.
And I found such fascinating background to what she was doing. First of all, she was born in her father was born in what is now the Czech Republic, and the family immigrated to Israel in 1939. Mother's American. Her grandparents were German-speaking Yekkes, and her father left Israel at 18, went to school in England, and then came to America and married her mother.
Mm-hmm.
So this is her background. The Susan in the story is a journalist. If
Yeah.
you don't know that, yeah, we did. Oh, I didn't even remember them mentioning that.
Yeah.
But the fact that she's a journalist, and there's a lot about intergenerational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Second generation, third generation. So she's third generation from the Holocaust, and her uncle is second.
Right.
And they don't even really talk to each other about any of what
Right.
their that they're going through, but they're kind of experiencing it in a parallel way.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of great stuff that is online that
Yeah.
really goes.
You sent me something I'm going to read in a minute. Sandy, go ahead.
At first, I wasn't sure that I liked the style of writing. And after a few pages, I really did. I felt like I was walking with her every step of the way. And I really think it was genius the way she wrote the story. And we learned it little by little, the background of everybody. You could just see the uncle. You could, I don't know, I just felt like I could see the whole picture in front of me. Even the fact that she chose that hotel. I mean, that hotel is very symbolic in Jerusalem. Very few Jews go to Jerusalem and stay in the American colony.
Right.
Hotel.
Meryl asked me about it and said, do I know about it? I said, yes, I know about it. I think I went there for tea in 79, but nobody stays there. It's in East Jerusalem. And
journalists do. Journalists stay there.
Yes, they do. They do. They do. Alice.
Well, I didn't look it up, but I have a journal. I was in Israel in 1968. We might have stayed at that hotel. We stayed in East Jerusalem. Oh yeah, we did.
Oh, in 68, that would be right after the 67 war. It was just in, because before the 67 war, it was, not in.
But we stay. I'm going to look it up in my journal. I'll let you know. But I know we stayed in East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Vanessa?
Yes.
I just have to tell Alice this. We were there in 68 off, and we get there and don't realize there are going to be such crowds there. And there wasn't a hotel with a vacancy. So the hotel that we went to told us, go to the YMCA. Go to the YMCA, I mean, which sounded ridiculous to me. Then I found out that a lot of Jews, especially young Jews, stay at the YMCA hotel.
It's right across from the King David.
Right. So we get there and they don't have a room. And where did they tell us to go? They tell us to go to the Notre Dame, which I couldn't believe, but we were desperate. We had 3 little children with us. We had a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so we went to the Notre Dame, and it turns out that it's all run by Arabs and it's Catholic. The hotel is Catholic. And do they have a room for us? They have 1 room with 3 cots, 3 cots, not beds, 3 cot beds. And we're 5 people if we count the little 2-year-old. She slept on my stomach on a cot bed, and we stayed there the whole week. It was the only place.
Yikes.
And
okay.
So it was a real experience, but Jerusalem was very special then.
I'm sure it was. Merle, then Lynn.
Okay. The reason I was there was we weren't staying there. We were staying at a hotel called the Le Rome, which I don't even know if it exists anymore in Jerusalem.
It does.
It does. Oh, it does. Okay. And we had a very rigorous touring schedule on buses and buses. So I thought I'm going to just organize a nice luxurious lunch for us at this hotel. And so we had a really good time and a beautiful lunch with a rice pilaf and all kinds of Middle Eastern foods. But I had no idea at the time that I wasn't even in an Arab neighborhood. I just thought it was formerly a Pasha's palace. They had a beautiful kidney-shaped swimming pool, not a lot of people, and we had a wonderful lunch there. So I'm really happy to learn what we did. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for teaching me about the geography.
Yeah. It's interesting. Lynn.
I want to get back to the form of the story. Right. I almost felt that it was diary journaling in the story, in the sense that it's 3rd person, but it has the feeling of it's not stream of consciousness, but to me it opened up a freedom for the author to comment on a previous entry. I found parallelism in the imagery, in the content, going from one entry to the next. And I have to say, the first read of this, I didn't enjoy. I read it again this morning, and I thought that her writing was spectacular. I mean, I thought her imagery and her word usage and just was phenomenal. And I have to say, if I knew more about this place, and I talked to Gary this morning because they just did a book where they learned all about this. Alice, do you remember the name of the book? It's a woman.
Yeah,
It's
Fatima, a memoir, something,
a memoir of
Marva Palestinian or something like that.
right.
Yeah.
And they learned all about this Deir Yassin. So it would explain to me why Zalman left Israel and came to the United States. But I had a totally different take on this story. So I'm gonna sort of shut up and listen to what
Well, what was your,
well,
what was,
I didn't feel it was depressing. I have to tell you. I thought it was so much talking about different ways people die and confronting one's death. And what is the most important? Is that what's most important in life, or is it how we live? And the idea of memory and the idea of legacy, and that we leave, the things that we leave behind for people to remember, is crucial. And if you try to drown out your memories, even the worst, you're sort of killing part of yourself. So that kind of loss in here is in so many different manifestations. Loss of memory with the Alzheimer's, and the loss of life, and all of the loss. You're killing your memories. And those memories, if you notice the word thinking and imagining are all through the story. And what we have left is our minds to trigger those things that make us who we are. So that was my take on the story. So I'm really eager to hear other people's interpretation.
I think, I don't remember who said it, that this, I think this might be a little autobiographical, and that she, you can see she's wrestling with having lived in Israel. And on page 418, she says, because her Hebrew is not good, in Israel, Susan's always a tourist. Or if not exactly a tourist, someone who can't exactly pass for a Sabra. That's somebody who was born there, even though this is the place her family is from. Or if not exactly from, the closest thing to it, closer than New York, Berlin, Vienna, or Love. And she says that, and then through the rest of the story, there's Hebrew verbs, she uses terms. The one term is a chamsin, and a chamsin is that dry wind in Israel. But she says she's a tourist, and then she keeps using all of these references to geographical places, Deir Yassin, Ben Yehuda Street, and the climate there. So perhaps the lady doth protest too much. And I, I know how hard it is. We have a cousin who lives in Beersheba, and she's from Boston. So, she's got that heavy Boston accent. And when she speaks in Hebrew, it's much easier for me to understand because she's slow and the accent. And I remember once she got mad at her kids and she's talking to them. And I was thinking, she's the mom on the street who has the accent. All the other kids are like, oh, she's American. So there, she's American. When she comes here, oh, you moved to Israel. Ellen, did you have your hand up? Wait, unmute.
Okay,
There you
I apologize for being late, but I'm much better and things are going well.
Excuse tardiness.
That's okay. I like the story. I read it twice also, and I kind of see it as I don't know that I would call them journal entries, but all of the other people's stories, they're at the end of their lives. Zalman his ashes are being scattered, the poor Eva that's got Alzheimer's. But Susan is there saying she may want to start all over. And it's really, I saw it as a juxtaposition of all the other people in her family as helping her sort through her life. Obviously, things haven't gone wonderfully for her before, but she still has enough fortitude to consider all these things. It's unclear as to whether she can't possibly know all the things that are in the third person there, but I think the reader feels like they're influencing her and hopefully making her, go on with a better future. So I saw it as a positive in that way.
Okay. Okay. Merle.
Well, in the section called Revisionist History, Avraham analyzes the nature of memory. And he's to remember how he met his wife 37 years ago. He thinks that he met her in the library. She thinks they met at a party. And he starts saying to his friend Udi, he says, so is memory a thorn in the sole of your foot or a lie? So he questions the whole nature of memory. And a lot of this story is about memory.
Memory.
Yeah.
I take the minutes in one of my for one of my professional groups, and someone said the person who takes the minutes writes the history.
Yeah.
So I always say revisionist history, but there's something to be said that if you're the one writing everything down, that's what you think.
Interpreting.
Yeah. Alice.
Yeah, okay. I agree with a lot that's been said. I guess what I found depressing about it is that I looked at it as a personal story about all these people, Susan, Zalman, Abraham. But then I thought that then it was the personal story as like a metaphor for Israel and Palestine and everything that's happened over and over and over again. And when we talk about memory, yes, I agree with what everybody said about memory. And there's so many places in the story, but what I noted in my book was on page 420. It's here, who is this? It's Abraham, I think. Yeah, Abraham. He's saying, as if memory were something you could excavate, analyze, piece together, solve, instead of a story you invent in the shape of your desire. To me, that says so much about Israelis and Palestinians.
Yeah.
They're looking at the same events, they're looking at the same land, but they're creating different stories. And that's what I think is so frustrating, depressing about how is this ever going to be resolved? How is this Israeli Palestine? I couldn't help thinking, because it's the war going on now, that this story resonated as that this has been going on and on and on. And
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to get resolved.
Yeah. Yeah. Terry and then Evie. Real loud.
I really felt that too, so much because of what's going on. I felt like it was even the idea of someone at some point, I don't remember where, they said that one story is that the Arabs were told to leave.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
The other story is
Right.
that
They were kicked out.
so
Right.
these two different, and the whole idea of Nakba is being revisited right now.
Absolutely.
In this moment.
Absolutely.
So that's certainly strike you. The other part is that her uncle was an archaeologist and she was a journalist, and both of them were digging, trying, get to the truth, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah.
And when you just read the part about Udi says, history schmistery, just because they call it revisionist, you think it has to be the truth? So that was kind of perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Evie, and then Elaine, and then Lynn.
So everything that I was gonna say was probably already said, but probably much better than I would say it. But first of all, when I first started to read it, I didn't enjoy it. Then I went back and I was a little calmer, and first of all, I want to admit that I really, when people would mention Deir Yassin to me in the past, I pretended I knew what they were talking about. I didn't know what they were talking about, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew a little bit. But last night we were having dinner, and Julian, I don't think he realized that we were reading this story or whatever. And he said he did a lot of reading today, yesterday, about it and so forth. I said, well, which part did you read? I mean, whose rendition did you read? And he said, well, he read some Arabic stuff, whatever. I mean, of course, not in Arabic. I struggle with the idea of history versus memory, and sometimes I'm so immersed in that and trying to sift out what is important. And yes, I think it was very, the timing of this to me was very important, to say that, we get so immersed in the emotion and we can't set back. But I just want to say that I actually loved the interspersing of language and expressions in it. To me, I felt it in the middle of the story, and I like any kind of a story that kind of throws in, not so much that I don't know what they're talking about, but enough to give a flavor of that it comes more from the heart and from the kishkis or whatever. But we talk about our story, not just Israel, but our Jewish story, and which story, or even our own stories, which story are we telling at the time? And so much depends on where we are at that moment and what glasses we're looking at it through. So I don't know that I loved this story, but I was glad that I read it, and it gave me food for thought in terms of, even if I'm looking at, a little bit of a 5-minute, 3-minute news thing right now. And whoever it was, I can't remember which Republican, which person was questioning the story, the words that were used on whatever was said over the weekend about the blood, the water, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And the words, and sometimes the overimportance of words too.
Yeah, absolutely. Elaine,
Okay,
real loud.
I remember being a child and going to Sunday school when the Irgun were fighting, and we would collect money and
That was
sing.
probably for the Haganah,
Yeah, okay, maybe it was.
not for the Irgun was really a right-wing
Oh, well,
crazy.
I'm not, maybe it was, okay. But as I read the story and I read the similarity to what is happening in Israel
Yeah.
now,
Yeah,
I thought, holy, you know what? Nothing has changed.
no, not really.
And I liked the story. I thought it was interesting. But I thought, we're going to be fighting these same thing 75 years from now. And
I
that
hope
sort
not.
of- well, that just made me so sad, because I
Yeah.
saw the similarities. I mean, it's almost like they're writing a today's story
Yes,
with a few little things, and nothing has changed.
yeah, yeah. It is,
I mean, I
it
thought
it
was
makes
very
you think.
timely reading it.
Yeah, Lynn and then Sandy.
Okay. A couple of things. This idea of getting stuck in time, that phrase came bounding into my head, because both sides are stuck in time. I mean, they really have sealed their memories, whatever to the worst that happened. So in the revisionist history section, on page 425, which came before Evie read the bottom half. I want to go to the top half. under revisionist history. Abraham says to Udi, who in his imagination has settled himself on, okay, listen, don't you think we owe it to our children to go back and get the story straight? Don't you think they didn't deserve to know the truth? Well, we all know the truth is different for each person. So I want to go back to the archaeologist image of Abraham. And back to that quote about excavating and analyzing and putting pieces together. I'm trying to hear. Okay, on 420.
420.
420. He has never thought much of Freud's interest in archaeology. His likening of tumbled ruins of the past to the unconscious mind, as if memory were something you could excavate, analyze, piece together, solve, instead of a story you invent in the shape of your desire. Well, each side is inventing a story according to the shape of our desires. I mean, let's be honest. Both sides are doing that. There is fact here. And the fact is those remnants that they dig up in archaeology where they piece together what exactly is the state of this society or civilization. So my dream is that
Or what they think the state of the society is.
Right. Well, I think at some point, they're going to have to sit down, both sides, and excavate and piece together and try to solve the story. And once they sit down and do that, maybe some rationality will take place there. And I have a feeling that they're going to need people from outside of the two sides to help them along in piecing together what actually happened. I don't think we know what actually happened. I mean, there's so many sides to this story.
Right.
When you told us about this title, I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It's another piece to the puzzle. So I don't think two can solve it themselves. I have to say.
You may be right, but so Sunday morning, for those of you who didn't hear, I can send you a YouTube link. I interviewed the parents of a woman who was murdered on October 7th. And their story was very gut-wrenching. And they told how Hamas went from, they knew where everything was on kibbutz, and they went house to house and where every safe was. And I said, how did they know that? Because they were workers there and they had given that information to Hamas. And someone said to me, we were talking about it in the office yesterday, and, how do you bring back trust after that? How do you, after something like that's happened, how do you bridge that? And Lynn, you may be right. It may have to be a third party who says, well, you did this, you did that, and you have to sit down. Sandy.
What's happening right now is such a big story. For years, we'll be learning more and more. I just learned about 3 days ago that after the first 1,500 Hamas came in, another group came in, maybe up between 1,000 to 3,000 people from Gaza came and just looted.
Yeah,
they looted.
That's what,
even 3 days later.
That's what the Vitale said.
Yes, and that's a horrible story too. Now, anybody that knows myself and David, we detest Netanyahu. We always have. And he is no different than the Irgun leaders and Ben-Gvir and Shmotrik, his two henchmen. And I blame him really for what happened, not just the army, but from Netanyahu down. And they're all going to pay a dear price in history, in Jewish history.
I hope they do. I think they're still trying to use a lot of it.
But on the other hand, it's interesting about Deir Yassin, which I've known about for years, and anybody who read O Jerusalem also knows about it. It's interesting that today it's a mental hospital on the grounds where that took place. And another thing, I don't know if you know, that 4.5 days later, after Deir Yassin, the Arabs killed a whole convoy of doctors and nurses that were coming from, I believe, Hadassah Hospital to tend to people. And there was a convoy of Jewish medical people, and they were slaughtered very much close to where that happened. It's just a horrible story. Both,
It is.
both, the whole thing is so horrible, but it's part of our history and we have to face it.
Yeah. Terry sent me this, and it's talking about Margot Singer, our author. In Deir Yassin, she demonstrates how death can serve as a springboard for connection. With the death of her uncle Zalman, Susan reconnects with her still living uncle Avraham. Although they connect, they do not verbally share stories regarding their familial trauma. Yet, her short story clearly indicates the continued intergenerational transmission of trauma throughout her narrative. At one point, a member of the second and a member of the third generations clocks freeze at exactly the same time, signifying the Holocaust trauma that troubled the second generation continues to plague the third generation. Did we read a short story, and I hope somebody here can help me, where we talk that trauma can go through generations, and that there's somebody who is doing medical research that, like, the trauma of the Holocaust can be passed on, the trauma of slavery can be passed on. So that's what I thought of when you sent me that piece, that we all have this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the story it'll come to me one day. Yeah, Joyce.
But I think there is a possibility for Susan and Avraham to break down some of those barriers and have some conversation. I think they are beginning to form a relationship that perhaps Leah, Susan's mother, Abraham never had. And if Susan continues to stay with Abraham and perhaps build some kind of a life in Israel, I'm a cockeyed optimist, I don't know, that perhaps they will build something together.
Yeah.
I have hope.
Yeah.
I have to just. jump
Terry.
in because that scene where they went to talk to his wife, where she thought Susan was Leah,
Mm-hmm.
he started to correct her and she put her hand on her arm like his wife used to do for him. And she just let it just evolve. Like she was fine with her thinking she was Leah. And the fact that this woman didn't really have, any short-term memories, but somehow this felt like she was transformed back, that she must have looked like her mother.
Yeah.
And that's what she thought she was.
Right.
I thought that was a beautiful scene.
That was a very beautiful scene. Very, very beautiful. Lynn.
The only trouble with that interpretation, which I would love to believe,
Yeah.
is that what's going on in the schools and the education of the younger generation and the teaching of the hatred.
Oh.
Which is in their books, which is in their madrasas, which is in, unless that changes.
Yeah.
And there are different movements like Hands of Peace and all of that that's attempting to get young people and young Palestinians and Jews together. I feel that the younger generation is the answer. I agree with that. And it does go through generations, but I feel that hatred is going through generations too. And how can we correct that? That's monumental.
Yeah, Alice.
Yeah, this goes along with what Lynn just said on the bottom of page 430 up until 431. This is when Abraham is taking Susan to see Deir Yassin. And I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay.
And he says, it's a psychiatric clinic, a mental hospital. There's so much this girl does not know. Although in fairness, he thinks many Israelis also probably don't remember what happened there. And he
Mhm.
wonders whether it is better to have forgotten or like the Palestinians to be unable to forget.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
I
a
think that really kind of is the
crux. That's
crux of the
Yeah.
issue. You know, can you forget? People won't forget. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, there's always like, I can't forget what happened. You know, I can't forget what happened in the Holocaust. I can't forget what happened in the War of 48. I mean, it's, Lynn, I would love to think that there's somebody that can say, this is what really happened. I'm not sure there is.
What was that novel that I forgot the name of it, where it's the Israeli father and the Palestinian father
Oh,
and
yeah,
both lost a child
right.
to bombers, and they formed this organization of people who have lost children in the terror attacks and are trying to does that sound familiar
I don't
to
know.
anyone?
The organization Circle of Friends, we've had them speak. They're very fascinating.
But Vanessa, I just want to say one more thing. I don't know if all of you are familiar with PJ Library that gives books to young children. Okay, I just got their newsletter in the mail, and I'm reading about all these authors went to Israel in May, this past May. And one of the places they visited was this school where Arab and Israeli children are in school. And this woman was saying, oh my God, it was so wonderful. You know, these two little girls were playing, blah, 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 blah. And then there's like a postscript after the story that these people got together after October 7th happened, you know, here in the United States. And like, you know, it's like the ideal was they saw, as people were saying, young people, you know, doing stuff to bring people together. But then October 7th happened and it all was to shreds.
Exactly.
All those good feelings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Abby, then Joyce.
I just getting back to what the idea of the death and the emotions and so on and so forth. And I think that the connections from something emotional doesn't really necessarily relate to the truth. I think something happens, there's a feeling there, and you may not see it the same thing, but the feeling, I think, permeates. I don't remember whose expression it was. You can, it's not what you did, it's not what people said or what they did, but how they made me feel. And I think a world event makes us feel, whether it's Holocaust survivors, whether it's Israeli, you know, a feeling of going into Israel and we all see things differently, but being there, there's a connection, and we're not dealing with truth of what happened. We're dealing with just something that you can't even touch. Even if you go into a synagogue service and there's something meaningful, we're all interpreting it or picking up on things differently, but somehow that feeling is stronger. And I think the feelings are much stronger than words. And sometimes, you know, you can get so lost in the words, you have more of an issue, that words can be divisive.
Really beautifully said. Really, really beautifully said. Joyce.
I'm just thinking that if we're basing things on history, then we have to learn how Palestinian leaders betrayed their own people.
Yes.
And they need to be taught that.
Yeah.
Things would have been so much different if Arafat hadn't walked out of the
Oslo Accords.
Oslo Accords.
Twice.
Yes.
I think I agree. They accept that Hamas is much more deviant. Somebody asked on Sunday, why don't the Palestinians like kick out Hamas? Hamas holds their families hostage, holds their house, their business. And it's just not a black and white thing. There's a lot of gray. And have they learned their lesson? I don't know. Is this going to continue? Yes, it probably will. And I had an executive director, and we deal with a lot of divorced families, and they call in, and she said, and I've always thought about it, she goes, there's his story, her story, and the truth. So I think about that here. Each narrative has their story, and then there's something. Terry, real out.
I think what Abby said, I worry about this. With what's happening in Gaza right now, I think of all the children that will survive this. How could they not be angry and full of rage and wanting, just to, I can't picture enough education that would change their minds about how they feel about everything that's gone on during this particular, not even talking about everything else, but just this particular conflict.
Yeah.
Because they've seen everything around them
Mhm.
that will make them feel very, very angered and sad and feeling
Yeah.
like at some point when they're older, won't they want revenge? How
Right.
do you possibly combat that?
There's no way for them to come out of this with an education, a job, to be successful. It's going to be very, very hard to combat. Sandy, then Lynn.
Talking about answering your question about how these people will feel, it's just like the word Nakba. They use Nakba for 50 years, 70 years, whatever.
75.
They just hang on to that word when they talk about the Jews. They'll never forget that they were forced out. And that story has been told so many different ways by Jewish audiences too. They don't say they were forced out. We were taught that the Arab leaders told them to leave and they'll come back, which may be a lot of Baba Mises too. We don't know who to believe on that story. But the one thing that I think of every day, I've been sitting thinking about this for 2 months. I watch all these people dragging through the streets with their babushkas and their babies and their mattresses, and these poor Palestinians, these poor Gazans. And you know what? I don't think I care. I don't think I care. I don't care how many get killed. I have thought about this every night. I don't care. What they did was so horrible. What Hamas did was so horrible on October 7th. And I look at these people dragging through the streets and I say, they are the mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and grandmothers of those boys. Every young man that came over the border and did those terrible things has families. And I can't believe that I can't believe that I feel that way, that I don't care about how many fall dead in the streets there.
Right. I mean,
I hope I outgrow this feeling.
Right. I think we can have compassion for what the Israelis have gone through and for what the Palestinians have gone through, and leaving Hamas obviously out of it. And I think that we have to keep reminding ourselves that Palestinians are not Hamas, and Hamas is just infiltrated. Lynn, then Meryl.
I think what we have to believe is that love is stronger than hate, and that these young children and their parents never want to go through this again.
Right.
And if they keep impressing upon their children, it really depends. And I think they need a lot of psychiatric help and and talking through this whole experience. I feel that no one wants to live in a war situation. you don't want to go through that again, Sandy. And I would think that hopefully these young children, they too might be the savior for, along with the young Israelis. I mean, we have to believe that love will surface more than the hatred. I know it may not seem like that in human nature, but I believe in human nature does not want to live through what they have lived through during this period of time.
Here, here. Merle.
Last year, Rabbi Taylor brought an Arab man to Macomb Solel
Oh,
Lakeside.
right, he did. Forgot about that.
Such an inspiring talk. The Arab man had a brother who had been killed by the Israelis, and he felt nothing but hatred for years toward the Israelis and the Jews. But something happened where he had this revelation, and he wanted to go and talk to the Jews and say, I don't hate you anymore, and I feel actually compassion. And so I wish Rabbi Taylor were here to help us out how that happened. But he's a person who you could contact and say, how did that happen that the Arab man lost his hatred for the Jews and only felt compassion? So
Yeah.
it was possible. It happened with this one man. So it is possible to turn things around.
I think that in the article about Margot Singer, she poignantly describes the nature of indirectly experiencing trauma as those that suffer from post-memory due to their distance but strong emotional connection to the actual event. She's talking about the Holocaust, but we could sub in here October 7th. When she writes that even those who escape dismemberment will suffer from an endless ringing in their ears. As Singer suggests, Holocaust trauma continues to plague the third generation in a troubling way. And we are not going to know how what's happening in Israel is going to trouble this generation, the next generation. We're just discovering all the stories, what happened. So it'll be very interesting to see. And hopefully, things will get better there. But that this is a trauma. I've seen social workers online offering, their services for free, and you can only imagine what's happening in Israel. Sandy.
I fear that if Biden and Blinken cannot stop Netanyahu from allowing what he's doing now in the West Bank, it will be a bloodbath there too. We have a lot of Palestinian friends because our farm was right outside of the West Bank. And, I lived there 12 years. I know a lot of Palestinians. And it doesn't have to be like that in the West Bank. But what he's allowing right now for Ben Gvir to do and these settlers, it could cause another thing, just like what happened in Gaza. And that's frightening. Yeah. They've got to stop these right wingers. They've got to stop them.
Yeah, listen, I totally, completely agree with you. We don't know what's going to happen in the West Bank. We don't know what's going to happen on the northern border with Hezbollah and Lebanon. And you're right, the Houthis, there's so much going on there that you can get news overload. I tell my mom, my 90-year-old mom, I'm like, turn it off, turn the TV off. Go find a different channel. Yeah, we will have a lot to watch. We'll have a lot to talk about. And we meet again on January 3rd. Right. So it'll be Happy New Year. And I think we'll continue this format. I still don't have the screen. Allegedly, I'll be hooked up. Every Monday and Tuesday, I'm like, hey, is it ready to go? Yeah, not yet. Then this week it was, we got the wrong cable. I'm like, come on, please. So I'm giving them these 2 weeks to get it together. And the name of the story we're reading is, and I'll send this out.
The Counterpart
by Nadia Kalman. So that screams Russian. The first sentence, I think it will be. All right. I'm sorry, what? Yes. Thank you, everybody. We're dialing back here. This afternoon, we are doing the movie Liberty Liberty Heights with Rabbi Sarada, and that we're always here for Shabbat. And if you need anything, you know where to get me. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.